than just basic needs, poverty with respect to one's well-being, by Kaelan, McCabe, and Elizabeth Grist.
Poverty. What's the first word that comes to mind? Homelessness? Starvation? Suffering? Robert Rector would disagree with this perception of poverty, as he argues that the actual living conditions of America's poor are far different from these images. Rector describes the poor as living a comfortable life, owning possessions such as air conditioning, television, and a car. Regardless of what material possessions a household has, we disagree with using material possessions, or lack thereof, to define a household's level of poverty. We believe that poverty should not be defined or measured by a numerical value, but rather by the well-being of the household or individual. This well-being, we believe, varies from household to household and therefore cannot be defined by an outside individual or entity.
Currently, poverty is measured based on the official poverty measure, developed by Molly Orshansky in the early 1960s. The OPM is an example of a relatively absolute measure of poverty. Absolute measures of poverty attempt to define a basic needs standard, for which a threshold income is determined. According to absolute measure assumptions, this threshold represents a level of income which people who fall below are considered economically disadvantaged. The OPM looks at a household's resources and compares them to this poverty threshold. This threshold is calculated by multiplying the minimum diet necessary for a household by 3, in order to account for a human's basic needs, such as food, clothing, utilities, and shelter, referred to as FCSU. To determine whether a household falls below the said threshold, analysts consider the family's resources. These resources include the pre-tax income of the household, plus cash-based aid from the government, such as disability checks and Social Security income. The OPM, however, is relatively absolute because it compares one family's diet to another, with respect to this determined threshold. The OPM has done well in creating an agreed-upon measurement of poverty and has signaled useful economic trends in our society. However, we believe the OPM is not a perfect measure of poverty. For our purposes, we are going to focus on a few specific shortcomings of the OPM. For instance, the OPM focuses on an average household that consists only of directly related family members. However, in our current society, it is not uncommon for couples to live together and support each other and their potential children without being married. These cohabiting couples, then, are not measured as a household in the OPM poverty threshold. The OPM also does not take into account government policies that affect a household's income, such as food stamps or payroll taxes, both of which free up a considerable portion of a household's income to spend on other goods and services. The OPM does not account for varying levels of expenses depending on a household's geographic location. And lastly, the OPM is a binary system, which means that it only determines whether or not a family falls above or below the poverty threshold. It does not indicate how far above or how far below the threshold the household is.
We think the Supplemental Poverty Measure, or SPM, is a better but still not exact measurement of poverty. The poverty threshold of the SPM allows more room for comfortable living. The SPM, like the OPM, is a relatively absolute measure. The measure is absolute because it also creates a threshold that determines if one's basic needs are met. However, the SPM is relatively absolute because the SPM compares one's basic FCSU spending to another's. To determine the threshold, the SPM multiplies the 33rd percentile of FCSU expenditures by 1.2. What does this mean? Let's break it down. Why multiply the 33rd percentile by 1.2? The 0.2 adds a cushion for extra spending. Whether that extra spending is on furniture, school supplies, participation in social events, etc., we believe this extra spending is necessary to allow individuals to be socially integrated into society. We believe that being socially integrated into society contributes to one's overall well-being. The SPM takes into account more modern statistics in measuring poverty than the OPM. Most notably, the SPM includes in household measurements cohabiting couples as well as co-resident children who are not related to the family. The SPM also takes into account geographic adjustments for the varying living costs in different areas of the country. The final aspect in which the SPM is better than the OPM is the resources which the SPM considers and doesn't consider as income. The SPM takes in-kind benefits into account along with cash income. These in-kind benefits, which can be used to meet basic FCSU needs, include government aid such as supplemental national assistance, housing subsidies, and the National School Lunch Program. From this income are deducted taxes, work-related expenses, child care expenses, medical out-of-pocket expenses, and paid child support. This is a better representation of one's income because when these factors are taken into account, the actual amount left over is the income available for a family to spend on FCSU needs. For instance, the SPM would be a helpful poverty measure for a single mother with a lot of kids. Although the mother receives in-kind government benefits, this aid would not be enough to support her family. The SPM takes this into account and compensates the mom for the expense of childcare. As a result, the mother can work for a living and does not have to stay at home and take care of her kids. However, we believe that the SPM is still not a good enough poverty measurement. Here's why. The SPM is still a binary system. One either falls above or below the threshold, but the SPM does not take into account how high or low one falls in relation to the line. Just like the OPM, this is a problem because how far one falls above or below the threshold can have a severe effect on one's well-being. Furthermore, it is hard to determine what counts as discretionary and non-discretionary aid. Because there are so many welfare assistance programs, such as supplemental national assistance and housing subsidies, it is hard to determine what assistance counts towards income and what doesn't. As a result, calculating the SPM threshold could be hard because there is so much room for error in self-reporting income.
Both the OPM and the SPM quantitatively set a threshold that determines whether a household or an individual is impoverished. Because this threshold is subjective, income or basic FCSU needs cannot be the only factors that determine if one is poor. We believe a better way to determine one's well-being is what philosopher Martha Nussbaum describes as capabilities and functionings. One's capabilities are the total set of possible beings and doings that one could attain. One's functionings, on the other hand, are the actual set of beings and doings that one is actively attaining from their possible capabilities. Each functioning that one possesses contributes to his or her well-being. In order to define poverty, Nussbaum provides a list of 10 central capabilities that all humans should be able to attain. While this list does include capabilities that we believe all humans should be guaranteed, we disagree with creating a list that defines one's well-being for them. For example, one of the central capabilities included on Nussbaum's list that she thinks is essential to one's well-being is living in relation to other species of life, such as pets. While one household's well-being may be enhanced by owning a dog for recreation, a different household's well-being may be diminished if even one of its members is allergic to dogs. As shown by this example, we believe the well-being of a household cannot be determined by any entity except for the household itself.
Regardless of how one's well-being is defined or enhanced, we believe that one's well-being is the best indicator of poverty. The measurement of one's well-being has a direct correlation to one's quality of life, whereas a measurement of one's income and FCSU needs may or may not, depending on one's own definition of their well-being. For example, a household in the highest economic class in an impoverished country presumably has a similar income to a household in the lowest economic class in the United States. However, the household in the impoverished country, in terms of their societal conditions, has a greater well-being compared to that of the low-income household in the United States. Therefore, income and basic FCSU needs are only relative measurements of poverty, while one's own definition of his or her well-being directly parallels with their life.